Today is my 63rd birthday. I am sitting in a gray metal chair inside an Atlanta Police Department interrogation room, and my hands, the same hands that graded 30 years of spelling tests, kneaded biscuit dough every Sunday morning, and held my husband's fingers while he breathed his last, are folded calmly in my lap. There is dried blood on my left sleeve. It isn't mine. Detective Pauline Webb sits across from me. She's a black woman, maybe 45, with the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing too much of what people do to each other. She has a legal pad in front of her and a pen she keeps clicking. Click, click, click. I think she does it without realizing. She's watching me the way people watch something they don't quite understand yet. I understand that look. 4 months ago, I would have looked at myself the same way. Say, Miss Washington, she says carefully, before your attorney arrives, I just need to confirm. You came here voluntarily. I did. And you're aware that anything you say, Detective Webb. I meet her eyes. I'm a retired school teacher from Decatur, Georgia. I have read the Miranda warning out loud to more children than you've probably arrested. Yes, I understand my rights. She pauses. Then something shifts in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. All right then. I look past her at the mirror on the wall. In my reflection, I see a 63-year-old woman with silver locks pulled back, reading glasses hanging around her neck on a beaded chain Jalen made for me at art camp, and a burgundy cardigan that has seen better days. I look exactly like what I am, and that, I have learned, is the most dangerous thing in the world. 4 months ago, I think, I was just a grandmother cleaning out her dead husband's closet. I had no idea what was hidden inside it. Let me tell you about Darnell Washington before I tell you what happened to him, because if I start with what happened, you'll miss who he was, and who he was matters more than anything else in this story. Darnell Eugene Washington was 5'11", built like a man who had spent 40 years actually using his body, with hands so calloused they felt like warm leather when he held yours. He had a laugh that started somewhere in his stomach and arrived about 3 seconds after the joke landed. A slow burn of a laugh, the kind that made everyone in the room eventually start laughing too, even if they'd missed the punchline. He was an automotive mechanic, not the kind who works at a dealership and wears a branded polo shirt. The real kind, the kind who had his own shop on Memorial Drive for 22 years, who could diagnose an engine problem by listening to it with his eyes closed, who kept his lifelong customers' cars running long past the point any reasonable person would have told them to buy something new. Ms. Evelyn's 1999 Camry, he used to say, is going to outlive us both. I've put too much love into that car. We met in 1981 at a church picnic in southwest Atlanta. I was 21, fresh out of Clark, Atlanta with my education degree, terrified of my first classroom and trying not to show it. He was 23, already apprenticing at his uncle's shop, smelling faintly of motor oil even in his Sunday clothes. He asked me if I wanted the last piece of sweet potato pie. I said no. I was watching my figure. He ate it. Then he looked at me and said, "That's the biggest lie you've told today, isn't it?" I married him 14 months later. We were not a perfect couple. Let me say that plainly because this story deserves honesty, not a fairy tale. Darnell could be stubborn as a rusted bolt. I could be, as he put it with great affection, a little bit relentless. We argued about money in our 30s, about his long hours in our 40s, about his health in our 50s when the doctor first used the word hypertension, and Darnell responded by eating a double cheeseburger in the parking lot of the medical building. But we chose each other every single day. That's the part I want you to understand. Not the romance, the choice. The daily, ordinary, sometimes boring, sometimes infuriating decision to come home to the same person and mean it. We bought our house on Fayetteville Road in Decatur in 1989. It cost $87,000, which felt like an impossible amount of money at the time. We paid it off in 2015 and Darnell cried, which was the second time I ever saw him cry. The first was when our son Tyrese was born. Tyrese Jerome Washington arrived in 1986 and proceeded to be the most earnest, serious child in the history of the Atlanta public school system. He did his homework without being asked. He made his bed every morning. He called his grandparents every Sunday. He got a scholarship to Georgia State, graduated top of his class, and became a family law attorney, which I always found quietly funny. My son, who spent his childhood enforcing rules in his own home with the dedication of a tiny judge, grew up to argue them for a living. He met Simone Carter at a charity gala in Buckhead in 2014. She was a registered nurse, 31, with a sharp cheekbone structure, perfect posture, and a smile that she deployed with the precision of someone who had learned its effect. She was beautiful in a way that made me want to trust her before I'd heard her say a single word. I've thought about that a lot since. They married in 2016. Jalen was born in 2013, before the wedding, a fact that nobody discussed out loud because this family has more grace than gossip. Jalen Darnell Washington was the best thing that came out of their union, and I say that with complete objectivity as his grandmother, which means I am absolutely right. My life, as of the morning of October 14th, 2024, looked like this. A brick house in Decatur with a vegetable garden in the back, and zinnias, red, always red, along the front walk. A coffee routine so consistent it had become a kind of prayer. Community dark roast, black, 2 cups, sitting on the veranda watching the neighborhood wake up. A volunteer job on Tuesdays at the elementary school 3 blocks away where I helped 3rd graders with reading comprehension. A standing phone call with my best friend Keisha every Thursday evening. And a locked drawer in my late husband's nightstand that I had been avoiding for 3 years. Darnell died on March 8, 2022. He was driving home from his shop on I-285. It was 11:14 at night. Late, because he always stayed to finish a job he'd started, always had. A habit I had long since stopped fighting. According to the accident report, his vehicle crossed the center median and struck a concrete barrier. No other cars were involved. There were no skid marks. The coroner listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma consistent with a high-speed collision. The grief was not dramatic. That surprised me. I had imagined that losing Darnell would feel like a sudden collapse, a wall falling in. Instead, it was like a long, slow fade. The house stayed warm. The zinnias came back in April the way they always did. The coffee routine continued, 1 cup instead of 2. Life did not stop. It simply changed its shape. I became good at being a widow. That is not something I say with pride. It just became who I was. In September 2021, 6 months before the accident, Darnell changed the passcode on his cell phone for the first time in 15 years. I noticed. I asked him about it one evening while we were washing dishes together, the way we always did. Him washing and me drying. A division of labor so old neither of us remembered agreeing to it. "Just being smart about security," he said, handing me a bowl. Raymond at the shop had his phone hacked, lost all his contacts. Raymond's phone got hacked because Raymond clicks on every email he receives, I said. Darnell laughed, that slow 3-second laugh. That's true. I dried the bowl and put it away and didn't think about it again. Until later, until much, much later. October 14th, 2024, my 63rd birthday, a Monday. I had been promising myself for 3 years that I would clean out Darnell's things. Every few months I would open the closet door, look at the row of his shirts, the flannels he wore to the shop, the 3 dress shirts he owned for church and weddings and funerals, the old Howard University hoodie he'd been wearing since before I met him. And I would close the door again. Grief has its own schedule. You don't rush it. But that Monday I woke up at 5:45, made my coffee, sat on the veranda, and watched the sun come up over the zinnias, finally turning brown at the edges in the October cold, and decided that today was the day. I spent the morning folding and boxing his clothes for the donation pile. The church had a community closet. The flannel shirts would do someone good this winter. The Howard hoodie I kept. I'm still not sure I'll ever give that away. Around 11, I reached the nightstand. The top drawer had already been cleared out. Watch, loose change, his reading glasses, the crossword puzzles he never quite finished. All of that had been collected in the days after his death and distributed or discarded. But the bottom drawer had a small brass lock on it. I had known about that lock. Darnell had kept things in there. Private things, he said once. Financial records he didn't want misplaced. I had respected that the way I respected all of his spaces. I hadn't looked for the key. On this particular morning, sitting on the floor with a cardboard box and a roll of packing tape, I decided it was time. It took me 40 minutes to find the key. It was inside an old fishing tackle box in the garage, tucked into a small velvet pouch I almost tossed into the trash pile. I almost tossed it. I want you to hold on to that fact. I unlocked the drawer. Inside, a folder of what appeared to be financial documents. A small velvet box that turned out to contain my mother's ring, which I had assumed was lost. A strip of photos from a mall photo booth, Tyrese and Darnell, probably 2005, both of them making ridiculous faces. I held that for a moment and had to set it face down. And at the very bottom, under a folded piece of newspaper, a small brown leather wallet. Not Darnell's regular wallet. That had been returned to me by the hospital. This was older, flatter, a different shade of brown. I didn't recognize it. I opened it. Empty slots for cards. No money, but tucked into the center fold, a single Polaroid photograph. Darnell. Smiling, broadly, openly, in a way I hadn't seen on his face in years. He was wearing a rust-colored flannel shirt I didn't recognize. Behind him was a wall of pine trees, tall and straight, with the pale gray light of an October morning filtering through. He was standing beside a woman. She was younger than me. I couldn't say by how much, maybe 15 years. She wore a dark green jacket and had natural hair pulled up in a bun, and she was laughing at something outside the frame of the photo. Darnell's arm was not around her. They weren't touching, but they were standing close enough that I noticed. The way you notice certain things even when you don't want to. I turned the photo over. In faded ballpoint ink, a handwriting I didn't recognize. Blue Ridge, October 2021. D and S. I sat on the floor of my bedroom for a very long time. The house was quiet. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, somewhere down the street, a leaf blower started up and then stopped. D and SD was obviously Darnell. S. I called Keisha. Keisha arrived 20 minutes later with a Tupperware container of pound cake because Keisha has never arrived anywhere in her life without food. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and I put the Polaroid between us. She picked it up. She looked at it for a long time, longer than I expected her to. "Who do you think this is?" I asked. Keisha set the photo down. "Could be a friend, Glenn. A work friend, or... Darnell knew a lot of people." Her voice was perfectly even. But her hands, when she set the photo on the table, had a tremor in them that I filed away somewhere without meaning to. Keisha has steady hands. She is a retired surgical nurse. She does not tremble. "You're probably right," I said. I believed that, genuinely. In that moment, I believed it. Because I had been married to this man for 40 years, and I thought I knew him, and sometimes love is the longest con we run on ourselves. I am not a woman who sits with questions. 30 years of teaching will do that to you. If something doesn't make sense, you find out why. Because children are watching and they learn how to handle confusion from the adults around them. I handled it the way I handled most problems. Quietly, methodically, without announcing myself. I did not confront Tyrese. I had no desire to shatter my son's image of his father based on a single photograph that might have an innocent explanation. I am a fair woman. I believe in evidence. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and spent 2 hours searching. Blue Ridge, Georgia, October 2021. Cabins, rentals, lodges with pine tree backgrounds. There were hundreds. I changed my approach. I searched Darnell's name alongside Blue Ridge. Nothing public. Then I remembered something. Darnell had an email address he used for the shop. A Gmail account that I had his login for in case of emergency, the way married couples accumulate each other's passwords over the decades without formal agreement. I had never once used it to look at his email. That felt like a line. I looked at it now. The inbox was mostly auto-delete. Part supplier newsletters, payment confirmations, customer appointment reminders. I filtered by October 2021. One email thread caught my eye. The sender was listed as P. Holt, Esquire. The subject line was simply, documentation, handle with care. The email itself was brief. Darnell, the copies are ready. Meet me Friday as planned. Bring what we discussed. P, that was it. No reply from Darnell visible in the thread. P. Holt, a lawyer. Why would my husband be secretly communicating with a lawyer? That same evening, I called Deshawn. Deshawn Williams was Darnell's first cousin. They had grown up together in the same house for 3 years after Deshawn's mother passed, practically brothers. He was 52 now, lived up in Alpharetta, did something in IT sales. He had always been easy to like, quick with a story, generous with praise, the kind of man who makes a room feel lighter. After Darnell died, he had been one of the first people at my door. "Deshawn," I said, "did Darnell ever mention going up to Blue Ridge? Maybe a hunting trip or..." A pause. Just a second. Just a beat too long. "Blue Ridge? Not that I can think of. Why?" "I found a photo. Him and some woman, looks like it was up that way." Another pause. "Glenn, you know how Darnell was. He knew everybody in a 5-county radius. Probably just somebody from the shop's weekend trip or something. One of those co-op things." He chuckled. "Don't go making yourself crazy over nothing." His voice was warm and reassuring. But at the end of the call, this is what I didn't think about until later. He said, "Get some rest, Glenn. It's all in the past now. It can't hurt you anymore." I remember thinking, that's an odd way to comfort someone. I remember thinking that. And then I put the phone down and forgot I'd thought it. Every Tuesday, Tyrese brought Simone and Jalen for dinner at my house. This had been the arrangement since Darnell's death. Tyrese's idea. A way of checking in on me without making it obvious that he was checking in on me. I loved him for it even as I saw through it completely. That's the thing about raising children. You spend 20 years reading them like a book, and then they try to hide things from you, and they forget that you wrote the index. The Tuesday after I found the photo, I cooked oxtail stew. Slow cooked since that morning, the way Darnell's mother had taught me, with white rice, collard greens, and the skillet cornbread that Jalen requested by name approximately every week of his life. Jalen arrived first, running ahead of his parents up the front walk, backpack bouncing. He was 11 years old, and at that stage of boyhood where everything is either the greatest thing that has ever happened or a catastrophe of the highest order, with very little in between. He hugged me around the middle hard enough to require bracing. "Grandma Glenn, can I sleep over Friday?" "Ask your mama." He made a face. "She's going to say ask Dad." "Then ask your dad." "He's going to say ask you." "Then yes," I said. "You can sleep over Friday." He pumped his fist and ran to the kitchen to investigate the stew. Simone came in behind him. She was wearing a camel-colored coat I hadn't seen before, her natural hair blown out and perfect, a tray of store-bought cookies in her hands. "Miss Glenn," she kissed my cheek. "It smells incredible in here." "Thank you, honey. Go sit down." She handed me the cookie tray. 3 varieties, professionally boxed, the kind that costs $15 and tastes like Careful, and went to the dining room. I watched her back as she walked away. Simone was not a warm person. I had long ago stopped deciding how I felt about that. Some people run cold. It doesn't make them bad. She was a good nurse, according to the hospital staff who had told me so when Darnell was first diagnosed with his blood pressure condition. She was organized and precise and never late to anything. She called me Ms. Glenn instead of Mama Glenn, even though I'd offered the latter 3 times, and after the 3rd time, I stopped offering. She was a perfectly adequate daughter-in-law, and she had never once, in 8 years, made me feel like she was glad to be in my house. Dinner was good. The oxtail was right. Jalen ate 2 bowls and tried for a 3rd before Tyrese redirected him toward the collard greens with a practiced dad look. We talked about Jalen's science project, about Tyrese's caseload, about the church's Thanksgiving drive, about whether the zinnias would come back stronger if I added compost to the bed this winter. Normal, warm, the Tuesday rhythm I had come to depend on. And yet, Tyrese and Simone did not look at each other once during that meal. I know what 2 people who are happy together look like at a dinner table. After 40 years, you develop an eye for it. The small reaching for the same serving spoon, the half glances when someone says something amusing, the unconscious alignment of posture toward each other. Married people move like they share a gravity. Tyrese and Simone that night occupied the same table the way strangers share a waiting room. I went to get more cornbread from the kitchen, which involved being on the other side of a half wall from the dining room. Not invisible, not inaudible, simply not in view. I heard Simone's voice, low and careful. Has she found it yet? Tyrese, no, don't worry. Tyrese, I said don't worry. I stood at the stove with the cornbread pan in my hand. Has she found it yet? I set the pan down slowly. I put 3 pieces of cornbread on the serving plate. I walked back into the dining room. Here we go, I said, and my voice came out warm and even, and I sat back down and asked Jalen about his science project and listened to him explain the water cycle with full dramatic sound effects. I filed those 6 words away. Has she found it yet? I told myself it was a birthday surprise. My birthday was 3 months away. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I told myself that. A good lie survives on its own until the second fact arrives. A week after finding the Polaroid, I hired Raymond Okafor. Raymond was not exactly a private investigator. He was a retired Fulton County Sheriff's deputy who occasionally did what he called background work for divorce attorneys, personal injury cases, the occasional suspicious insurance claim. Keisha had mentioned his name once, years ago, in context I could no longer remember. I found his number in my old address book. I gave him $500 in cash and the photograph and the name of the cabin rental area. I want to know who this woman is, I said, and I want to know how my husband knew her. Raymond was a compact, quiet man in his mid-50s with a methodical way of speaking that I found professionally reassuring. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He said he'd have something in 3 to 5 days. He called back in 2. The cabin is called Sugar Creek Cabin, private rental property up off Highway 515, about 8 miles past the town of Blue Ridge. Records I can access show it was rented under the name Deshaun Williams in October 2021. 2 nights, paid in cash. He paused. Occupants listed as 2 adults and 1 minor child. I wrote it down. Deshaun. It was a co-op trip, Deshaun had said. Don't go making yourself crazy. The woman in the photograph, Raymond continued. I can't ID her from a Polaroid, but I can tell you the cabin booking included a second contact name in the rental agreement. For emergencies. Whoever owned the booking put down a secondary contact. Who was it? Card on file for any damage deposit, he said. Simone Carter. The room was very still. Simone Carter was Simone's maiden name. She had kept it professionally, used Carter for her nursing license, her work records, but socially went by Washington after the marriage. You're sure? I said. It's in the rental records. Yes, ma'am. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in Harold's, in Darnell's chair, the big armchair in the den that still held the particular shape of him after 3 years. And I stared at my living room. My husband in a cabin with a mystery woman. The cabin booked by his cousin Deshaun. The damage deposit card in the name of my daughter-in-law. Raymond had emailed me a PDF of the records he'd pulled. I read through it twice, looking for the woman's identity. Still no closer. In the last page of the rental file, a standard occupancy form, there was a line item I almost skipped. A note from the rental agency. Booking notes. 2 adults, 1 child. Secondary adult confirmed as professional reference, not overnight guest. Separate transport. I didn't understand what that meant. I highlighted it and moved on. A professional reference, not an overnight guest. That detail sat at the edge of my thinking like something I'd forgotten to turn off before leaving the house. A small, nagging wrongness. I didn't stop to examine it. I was too focused on the shape of the story I thought I was seeing. And that certainty, was exactly what someone was counting on. I called Tyrese on a Thursday afternoon. I had spent 2 days sitting with what Raymond had told me. The cabin. Deshaun's name on the booking. Simone's name on the deposit card. I had arranged these facts in every possible order, looking for the configuration that made innocent sense, the way you keep turning a puzzle piece trying to force it into a spot where it doesn't belong. I couldn't find it. So I called my son. I didn't tell him everything. I told him I had found a photograph in his father's things. A Polaroid. A woman I didn't know. A cabin up in Blue Ridge. I kept my voice measured, almost clinical. The voice I used when I was delivering bad news to a student's parents. Calm, clear, not accusatory. I finished. I waited. Silence. Not a second. Not 2. I counted, the way you count between lightning and thunder. 8 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Mama, Tyrese said, I'll come over right now. Not what woman? Not what was Dad doing in Blue Ridge? Not are you okay? Just I'll come over right now. Like someone who had been waiting for a phone call and knew when it finally came exactly what it meant. Tyrese, I said, where are you right now? At the office. I'm leaving now. His office was on Peachtree Street, 35 minutes from my house in normal Atlanta traffic. On a Thursday afternoon, closer to 45. He was on my porch in 19 minutes. I stood at the living room window and watched his car pull up, and I thought, he was already in the car. He was already driving before I called. He got out looking like a man who had not slept. His shirt was pressed. Tyrese was always pressed, but his eyes were the color of old bruises, that particular red-rimmed look that doesn't come from crying once, but from crying across many days. He had been carrying this, whatever this was, for a long time. He came inside. He sat down. He opened his mouth. And my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. Ms. Glenn. Don't let Tyrese explain it to you. Find out for yourself first. Go to Sugar Creek Cabin. Blue Ridge. Kitchen table. Bottom drawer. Blue envelope. Still there. A friend. I looked at the message. I looked at my son. Tyrese's eyes dropped to my phone. He couldn't read it from across the room, but something in my expression told him enough. For just a moment, half a breath, I saw something move across his face. Fear. Not what is that? Fear. She knows fear. I put the phone in my cardigan pocket. Tell me everything, I said. He started talking, but I had already decided. First, I was going to that cabin. I left Atlanta at 5:30 on a Friday morning before the city was fully awake. I did not tell Tyrese. I did not tell Keisha. I backed out of my driveway in the gray pre-dawn and pointed my car north on 285, then 400, then the smaller roads that wound up into the North Georgia mountains. The kind of roads that get quieter and narrower and more honest the further you go from the city. It was October. The trees were at their peak, red and orange and that particular burning yellow that looks like the hills are lit from inside. Darnell had loved fall. He used to say fall was God showing off. I drove through it and didn't see it. My mind was running the same loop it had been running for 4 days. The photograph. The name on the deposit card. Tyrese arriving 19 minutes from 35 minutes away. Has she found it yet? Deshaun saying it can't hurt you anymore before I had even told him I was hurt. 8 miles past the town of Blue Ridge, I turned onto a 2-lane road, then a gravel road, then a dirt road that my little Camry handled with some complaint. The GPS on my phone said I had arrived. Sugar Creek Cabin. It was smaller than I had imagined. A brown wooden structure with a green metal roof and a front porch that faced east, toward a wall of pine trees so tall they turned the morning light into something cathedral. There was a wooden rocking chair on the porch with a faded plaid cushion, a rusted wind chime hanging from the eave, barely moving. It had the feeling of a place that had held secrets and let them go. A woman answered the door on the second knock, 50 maybe, Vietnamese American, with paint-stained jeans and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at me the way people look at strangers who arrive uninvited at 7 in the morning. Not hostile, just cautious. I'm sorry to bother you, I said. My name is Glenn Washington. My late husband spent time in this cabin a few years ago. I'm trying to understand some things about his life before he passed. I paused. I know that sounds strange. She looked at me for a moment. Then something in her face settled. Barbara Nguyen, she said, and opened the door wider. Come in. I just made coffee. The kitchen was small and clean, with pine walls and a window above the sink that framed the morning woods like a painting. Barbara Nguyen had bought the cabin in early 2023, she told me, from a seller named Deshaun Williams. Cash sale, quick close. She'd been using it as a painting retreat. I'm trying to find something, I told her, after she handed me a mug. There may be something left in the kitchen, under the table, in a drawer. She gestured. Go ahead. The kitchen table was pine, hand-built, with a shelf underneath and 2 drawers built into the side. The bottom drawer was stuck from humidity. I had to work it open slowly. Inside, a broken corkscrew, 2 birthday candles, a takeout menu for a place in Blue Ridge that had probably closed, and at the back of the drawer, pushed flat against the wood, a blue envelope. A standard letter-sized envelope, blue, the color of a clear winter sky. No name on the outside. My name was on the inside. Glenn, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. I held the envelope for a moment. Barbara Nguyen was washing her coffee mug at the sink with her back to me, giving me the privacy of a stranger's good manners. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. Not a love letter, not a confession, a document, a photocopy of an insurance policy, life insurance. The insured, Darnell Eugene Washington. Policy value, $750,000. Original beneficiary designation, highlighted in yellow, Glenn Marie Washington, spouse. Below that, a second highlighted section. Beneficiary amendment, filed November 14, 2021. Amended beneficiary, Deshaun A. Williams. And at the bottom of the amendment page, a signature, Darnell Washington. I stared at that signature for a very long time. In 40 years of marriage, I had seen my husband sign his name thousands of times. On checks, on tax returns, on Tyrese's permission slips, on the deed to our house. Darnell had a particular way of writing, the D big and looping, the W sharp and angular, the letters leaning slightly right as though they were in a hurry to get somewhere. This signature leaned left. This signature's D was small and closed. This signature was not Darnell's. I put the paper back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my purse. I thanked Barbara Nguyen for her coffee and her kindness. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes without starting the engine. $750,000, signed over to Deshaun, 2 months before Darnell's death. A signature that was not Darnell's. I started the car. I called Raymond Okafor. My hands were on the wheel. My voice was steady. This is what 63 years teaches you. Raymond, I need you to pull the accident report on my husband's death. March 8, 2022, I-285 southbound around mile marker 51. Everything you can get. That's a 2-year-old accident report, Glenn. I know what it is. A pause. Give me 2 days. He called back in 26 hours. His voice, when he did, was careful. The kind of careful that means, I found something and I'm deciding how to say it. The accident report is straightforward, he began. Single vehicle collision, no witnesses listed. Vehicle crossed the center median at high speed and struck a concrete barrier. Investigation closed as accidental. But no traffic cameras captured the incident. He paused. That stretch of I-285 had a documented camera outage that entire week. System maintenance, according to GDOT records. 1 week. The whole week. No footage from 3 cameras covering that stretch. I was quiet. And Glenn, the individual who called 911, the first person to report the accident. Deshaun, silence on his end. Yes, he said. Deshaun Williams called it in at 11:19 p.m. Said he was driving behind your husband's vehicle and witnessed the car veer suddenly. What was Deshaun doing on I-285 at 11 o'clock at night? According to the accident report, he told the responding officer he was driving home from dinner in Smyrna. Deshaun lives in Alpharetta, I said. That's 30 minutes in the other direction. Raymond didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There are moments when the world rearranges. Not all at once. Not like an explosion. More like a long-held breath finally letting go. And in the exhale, everything is exactly where it was. The kitchen table, the morning coffee, the familiar weight of your own hands in your lap. But none of it means the same thing anymore. I pulled the car off onto a side road. I put it in park. I sat in the quiet Georgia morning, and I let myself understand what I was beginning to understand. Deshaun, on the same road, at the same time. The only witness. The new name on a $750,000 insurance policy with a forged signature. The man who had cried at Darnell's funeral and held me by the elbow when my knees buckled at the graveside. Numbers do not lie the way people do. Numbers are patient. They sit in documents and spreadsheets and account records waiting for someone to look at them in the right order, and when that order finally comes, they tell you everything. I drove home from Blue Ridge and went straight to my filing cabinet. Darnell had kept meticulous financial records, one of his few truly organized qualities. 3 decades of manila folders, one per year, labeled in his slanted handwriting. Tax returns, bank statements, insurance documents, household bills. I pulled 2021 and 2022 and spread them across the kitchen table. I started at the beginning of 2021 and read forward month by month. January through July. Routine. The shop's income. Our mortgage payments. Long since paid off, but the property tax. My small teacher's pension. Utilities. Groceries. The unremarkable arithmetic of a life. August 2021. A cash withdrawal. $45,000. From our joint savings account. No corresponding deposit anywhere. No large purchase I could identify. No notation in Darnell's records. And Darnell always made notations. I wrote it down on my legal pad. August 2021. $45,000 cash. Purpose unknown. October 2021. The Blue Ridge trip. The email from P. Holt, esquire of the Polaroid. November 2021. The insurance beneficiary amendment. With the forged signature. February 2022. I found a notation in Darnell's folder, a single business card tucked into the February tab. Patricia Holt, attorney at law. Buckhead office. In Darnell's handwriting on the back. February 3rd. Bring the USB. The USB. I didn't know about any USB. March 8th, 2022. Darnell died. Then I pulled 2022. After. April 2022. The insurance claim filed by Deshaun Williams as beneficiary. May 2022. The payout recorded in the insurer's public filings Raymond had pulled. $750,000 disbursed. June 2022. Deshaun Williams purchased a home in Alpharetta, Georgia. Public record. $380,000. July 2022. Simone Washington, my daughter-in-law, voluntarily resigned her nursing position at Grady Memorial Hospital. To spend more time with family, her LinkedIn announcement had said. I stared at that date. Simone, who had worked full-time since before I knew her. Simone, whose career had been a point of consistent pride. Simone, who had introduced herself to me at Tyrese's family dinner as a nurse. First, wife second. A statement I had privately found strange and publicly smiled at. Simone quit her job 1 month after a $750,000 insurance payout went to her husband's cousin. 1 month. My pen was very still on the legal pad. And then I wrote 2 names, side by side. Deshaun, Simone. And underneath them, a question. How long? Raymond had been working the case, as he called it, without me fully asking him to. He had the instincts of a man who, once he started pulling a thread, couldn't stop until he knew what it was attached to. He sent me photos on a Wednesday afternoon. A coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta. Small, the kind with exposed brick and a chalkboard menu, the kind that takes 20 minutes to make a latte and considers that a feature. In the photos, Simone, in a gray wrap coat, sitting across a small round table from Deshaun, leaning in. Both of them talking with the focused, private energy of people who are not on a first date, not on a business meeting, but in the middle of something ongoing and serious. First meeting, September 14th, Raymond's note said. Second, October 2nd. Third, October 21st. This photo, November 3rd. These are just the ones I documented this month. Based on their comfort level, this has been happening for a long time. A long time. I scrolled back through Raymond's photos slowly. In one of them, Simone was laughing. Full, unguarded, her head slightly back. A laugh I had never once seen in my dining room over 8 years of Tuesday dinners. I set my phone face down on the table. I thought about the question that had been sitting at the edge of everything, the one I had been most afraid to get to. Did Tyrese know? Some questions you can't answer from a filing cabinet. I drove to Keisha's house at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. She lives on the other side of Decatur, A brick split level with rose bushes along the front and a porch light that she leaves on until midnight because her mother taught her that a porch light is a form of welcome, and she has never stopped believing that. She opened the door before I knocked. She had been watching for my car. "Glenn," she said. Just my name, the way she says it when she knows everything that comes next is going to hurt. "You knew something," I said. I did not make it a question. She stood aside to let me in. She was wearing her house coat, the old blue one, and she had clearly been sitting in her reading chair. Her book was face down on the side table. Her reading glasses were in her hand. She sat. I sat across from her. "Tell me what you know," I said. "All of it. Right now." Keisha looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at me. "Darnell came to see me," she said. "In January 2022. January, 6 weeks before he died." She took a slow breath. "He came here, to this house, alone. It was a Tuesday evening. He sat right where you're sitting. He had a cup of coffee and he didn't drink any of it." A pause. "And he told me he was scared." The room was very quiet. "Scared of what?" "Of what he'd found out." Keisha looked at me steadily, the way a good nurse looks at a patient when she's about to say the thing they don't want to hear. "Glenn, Darnell had discovered something. About Deshawn, about Simone. He'd been piecing it together since the summer." She stopped. "Keisha," my voice was still, very still. "He said he couldn't tell you," she said. "Not yet. He said, and I want you to hear his exact words. He said, 'If I tell Glenn now, and I'm wrong about any part of it, I'll have put her through hell for nothing. And if I'm right, I need more time to make it impossible to deny.'" I looked at my oldest friend. "He was protecting me." "He was protecting you," she confirmed. "And he was protecting Tyrese, because he wasn't sure yet how much Tyrese knew or didn't know. He didn't want to blow up his son's marriage on suspicion. And you," I said carefully, "kept this from me for 3 years." Keisha's eyes filled. "He made me promise, Glenn. He said if anything happened to him, if anything happened, I should wait. Wait for you to find it yourself. He said you would. He said you'd find it." She reached across and took both my hands in hers. "He knew you'd come looking. He just needed to make sure you'd find the right things when you did." I sat with that. My husband, who had been afraid, who had been carrying a terrible knowledge alone for the last months of his life, who had made arrangements, left trails, hidden envelopes in cabin drawers, and told his most trusted witness to wait. Wait for Glenn. She'll find it. "Keisha," I said quietly. "Yes. What exactly did he find out?" And Keisha told me. She told me in the voice she used to use when she was briefing surgeons. Precise, sequential, no editorializing. Darnell had begun to suspect something was wrong in the summer of 2021. It started with a conversation he overheard. He had come home from the shop early one afternoon in July. A customer's car had been finished ahead of schedule, a rare small miracle, and walked into the kitchen to find Simone there. She came by the house sometimes when I was out, to pick something up for Tyrese, or to leave groceries, or for reasons I'd never thought to question because why would I? She was on her phone. She didn't hear Darnell come in. He heard 2 sentences before she turned around and went silent. "The timeline needs to move up," and then, "He's getting suspicious." She'd ended the call immediately, smiled, made up a story about a surprise party for Tyrese. Darnell had smiled back and let her leave, but he had heard her voice. And Darnell Washington, who could diagnose an engine by sound alone, who had spent 40 years listening to things that were off, who had the particular intelligence of a man who paid attention, heard something wrong in those 2 sentences that he couldn't unhear. He started paying attention. He found the insurance policy amendment. He found the signature that was not his. He began going back through the finances and finding the things that had been hidden in plain sight. The $45,000 cash withdrawal that Deshawn had asked him to make to avoid taxes on a shop loan. The story Darnell had believed at the time. He found Deshawn's name appearing in places it had no business being. And he found Simone's credit card records, through a shared family account she had apparently forgotten was still linked. showing charges in Blue Ridge, charges at the same cabin, on dates when she had told Tyrese she was at a nursing conference in Savannah, Simone and Deshawn. Not an affair that started after the marriage. Keisha said Darnell believed it had been going on for years before, possibly before the wedding, possibly from the very beginning. And then she told me the thing that made the whole structure collapse and rebuild itself into something I had never imagined. "Glenn," Keisha said, "Darnell wasn't the target." I went very still. Darnell found a message on Deshawn's old email, a shared account they'd used for the shop years ago that Deshawn had forgotten Darnell still had access to. She paused. The message was from Simone, from 2020. It laid out a plan. The plan. Take out a life insurance policy on Darnell. Forge the signature. Simone had worked in hospitals long enough to know the paperwork. Name Deshawn as beneficiary so the money didn't go through the estate and couldn't easily be traced to Simone. Wait, then make sure Darnell's existing heart condition did what heart conditions do, with some help. Then, after the payout, Deshawn splits it with Simone. Deshawn gets his cut as cash. Simone gets hers later, after a reasonable period, through the divorce settlement from Tyrese. In the meantime, Simone stays in the marriage, stays close to the family, stays above suspicion. My husband was not having an affair. My husband had discovered that his daughter-in-law and his cousin were planning to kill him, and he had spent the last 8 months of his life trying to build a case that would protect his family after he was gone, because he knew that confronting them directly, without airtight proof, would only make them move faster. He had been right. He ran out of time anyway. I sat in Keisha's living room. The rose bushes outside were invisible in the dark. The porch light was on. I thought about Darnell, about the last year of his life, about how he had seemed distant, distracted, sometimes frightened in a way I attributed to his health, about the new phone password, about the email from P. Holt Esquire, about the brown leather wallet he kept locked in a drawer with a fishing tackle key. He had been building an ark while the water was already rising. He just didn't make it out. The woman in the Polaroid. Not a lover. A lawyer. Patricia Holt, the attorney whose business card was in his February folder. A professional contact. A woman he'd driven to a remote cabin to meet because he didn't trust that his home, his office, his phone, anything connected to his daily life, was safe from people who were watching. D and S. Darnell, and not a woman named S. Darnell and his attorney. The S was a smeared P from a ballpoint pen running low on ink. I had checked the original photo after Keisha told me. The last drop of ink had turned a loop into a near closing. A P that looked at a glance like an S. 40 years of marriage destroyed by a half-inch of dried ink. Except it wasn't. My husband had never stopped being my husband. I looked at Keisha. "Where's the USB he mentioned to Patricia Holt?" Keisha looked at me. "Tyrese found it," she said, 3 months after Darnell died. I drove home from Keisha's house at 11:30 at night. The Atlanta streets were quiet the way they only get after 10. The particular stillness of a city that never fully sleeps but does, for a few hours, lower its voice. Streetlights on wet pavement. A gas station on the corner with one person inside under fluorescent light. A dog walker on a sidewalk, patient and alone. I drove through it all and felt completely outside of it. Not numb, I want to be clear about that. I have heard people describe shock as numbness, as a kind of cotton wool distance from reality. That was not what I felt. What I felt was the opposite. A ferocious, crystalline clarity, the way the world looks after you've cried hard, and your vision comes back sharper than before. Every detail precise, every edge defined. Darnell had known. Darnell had known, and he had not run, and he had not collapsed, and he had not come to me in the night and said, "Glenn, I'm frightened," though God knows he had every right to. Instead, he had done what Darnell Washington always did when something was broken. He had found his tools and he had gone to work. He had spent the last months of his life building the case that would save his family. And then someone had made sure he ran out of road on I-285 on a Tuesday night in March. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the dark. "Tyrese has the USB," Keisha had said. My son had known for 2 years, had been living with this, whatever version of it he had pieced together, for 2 years, had brought his wife to my table every Tuesday, had passed her the cornbread, had watched her kiss my cheek at the door. I needed to know how much he knew and why he had stayed silent. I called him before I got out of the car. He picked up on the first ring. "Mama?" His voice told me he had been waiting. "I'm home," I said. "Come over." "Now?" "Now, Tyrese." A beat. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. This time I didn't clock it. He arrived looking like a man who had put down something very heavy and wasn't sure his arms remembered how to hang at his sides. He came in without knocking. He never knocked. This was still his house in every way that mattered. And he stood in my kitchen doorway and looked at me sitting at the table with my hands folded on top of the legal pad and the insurance papers and Raymond's photos. And something in his face broke open. Not dramatically. The way old wood splits, quietly, along a grain that was always there. "Sit down," I said. He sat. "Tell me what you know. All of it, in order. Don't protect me and don't protect her. Just tell me." He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. "I found a note," he said. "In Dad's wallet. The good one. The one from his suit jacket they gave back to us from the hospital. I went through his things about 3 months after the funeral, when you were at your sister's for the weekend. I wasn't ready to do it with you there." He paused. The note was folded small inside the card slot. It just said, "Basement. Red toolbox. Hoosby for Glenn. For Glenn." "You went to the basement." "Yes." "And you found it." "Yes." He was quiet. "It was inside the red Craftsman toolbox on the second shelf. USB drive, taped to the bottom of the tray." "What was on it?" Tyrese rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture he had made since he was 9 years old when something was difficult. "Emails, screenshots of text messages, financial documents, a recorded phone call, 18 minutes between Deshawn and someone I didn't recognize at first." He looked up. "It took me a few weeks to match the voice. It was Simone, a different phone number, a number she used that I'd never seen." I looked at my son. "Tyrese, your father was murdered." The word landed in the room and stayed there. "I know," he said, very quietly. "I know, Mama." "And you didn't come to me." He met my eyes, and I saw in them something I recognized because I had felt it myself. Once, when Tyrese was 16 and had gotten into serious trouble at school, and I had handled it alone rather than tell Darnell because I knew it would break his heart. The particular anguish of protecting someone you love by carrying their burden yourself, and the particular loneliness of that choice. "I didn't know how much you could take," he said. "You had just lost him. You were—" "Mama, you were grieving. You were still setting 2 coffee cups out every morning. I used to watch you through the kitchen window when I came to pick you up for church, and you'd have 2 cups on the counter, and then you'd stop and put one away and just stand there for a second." His voice broke on the last words. "I couldn't tell you that the man you were grieving had been murdered by the woman sitting at your dinner table every Tuesday." I absorbed this. "You were also," I said carefully, "living with that woman." He closed his eyes. "Yes. You were sleeping next to someone you believed had killed your father." I wasn't certain, not legally certain. I had the USB, but I needed to understand it better. I consulted a lawyer friend off the record. He said without a proper investigation, the USB might not be enough. He said I needed to be careful. He opened his eyes. "And I had Jalen. Mama, I have Jalen, and she's his mother, and I kept thinking, if I move wrong, if I do this wrong, she disappears with him somewhere, and I never—" He stopped. "I understand," I said. And I did. I understood it completely. Not just as a mother hearing her son explain himself, but as a woman who had spent 40 years watching the people she loved calculate impossible equations, how much truth to tell, when to hold, when to speak. "I'm not angry at you," I said. He let out a long, shaking breath. "But we're done waiting," I said. "Your father is done waiting. You have the USB. I have the insurance documents and Raymond's records. And we have Darnell's lawyer." I slid Patricia Holt's business card across the table. "She's been waiting 2 years for someone to call." Tyrese looked at the card. He picked it up. "What do we do first?" he asked. First, I said, you take me to the basement. I want to see everything your father left. The red Craftsman toolbox was exactly where Tyrese said. Second shelf of the basement workshop between a can of WD-40 and a jar of wood screws. Darnell's workshop had always been the most organized room in the house. The precise, logical order of a man who spent his days solving problems and understood that the ability to find your tools quickly was the first prerequisite of solving anything. Tyrese lifted the tray. Taped to the underside, a small black USB drive. We took it upstairs to Tyrese's old laptop. The drive contained 7 folders. Insurance, the policy documents, the amendment, side-by-side signatures proving the forgery, a professional handwriting analysis Darnell had apparently commissioned privately. Financial, the cash withdrawals, the trust routing, the paper trail from Deshawn's account showing money flowing in and out in patterns that Raymond had only begun to trace. Communications, 18 months of emails between Simone and Deshawn, pulled from the shared shop account. The language careful, coded in places, but not careful enough for someone who knew what he was looking for. Phone records, the recorded call. 18 minutes. I pressed play. Deshawn's voice first, low and even. He's getting too close. We need the timeline moved up. Then Simone. If we move it up, it has to look exactly right. He has a documented heart condition. That's our cover. But it has to be gradual. How gradual? 6 to 8 weeks. I can manage his medications through the home visit schedule. He trusts me completely. A pause. And after? After I stay. 2 more years minimum. Then the divorce is just a divorce. Nobody looks twice. I stopped the recording. I looked at Tyrese across the table. His face was white and very still. She managed his medications, I said. She helped him when his blood pressure was bad, Tyrese said. She'd come by on days I was working late. She said she wanted to make sure he was taking them correctly. She said, he stopped. She said you sometimes forgot to remind him. I never forgot, I said. Not once in 40 years. We sat with that for a moment. The last folder was labeled simply, for Glenn. Inside, one document. A letter, typed, dated February 28, 2022, 8 days before the accident. I read it at the kitchen table with Tyrese sitting across from me. Glenn, if Patricia has given you this, or if you found the USB on your own, and I believe you will, because I know who you are better than anyone alive, then I need you to know several things. First, I was not unfaithful to you. I know how things may look. The trips, the lawyer, the things I couldn't explain. I need you to know that in 43 years of knowing you, I never once stopped wanting to be your husband. Everything I kept from you these last months, I kept to protect you. I know that may sound like the thing every man says when he's been keeping secrets. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and know the difference. Second, Deshawn and Simone have been planning this since at least 2020. I have documentation of this on the drive. I have given copies to Patricia Holt. She knows what to do with them. If you are reading this without her involvement, call her. Her number is on the card in my February folder. She has been expecting you. Third, and this is the hardest part to write, I don't know if Tyrese knew any of this. I pray that he didn't. The version of my son that I know could not have sat at your table knowing what Simone is. But I also know that love makes people capable of terrible blindness, and I know that he loves her, and I know he loves Jalen, and I could not bring myself to look him in the eye and ask. If he knew and said nothing, that is something the two of you will have to work through without me. If he didn't know, protect him from learning it too quickly. Give him time to land. And Jalen, Glenn, watch over that boy. Whatever his mother is, he is innocent. He is ours. I have spent a lot of time these last months being angry. Angry at Deshawn, who I loved like a brother, and who looked me in the eyes at my mother's funeral and called me family. Angry at Simone, who I never trusted completely but never expected this. And, I have to be honest with you, angry at myself, because I saw things early and I told myself I was imagining them. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that family doesn't do this. I was wrong about that last one. But I was never wrong about you. You were the best decision I ever made, Glenn Marie. The sweet potato pie was the second best. Don't ever let anyone tell you that age makes you less than you are. You are more than you have ever been given credit for. I have always known that. I'm sorry I won't be there to watch you do what comes next, but I know you will. All my love, all my life. Darnell. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I looked up at Tyrese, who was crying, fully, openly, the way men cry when they finally stop trying not to. I got up, and I held my son the way I held him when he was 4 years old and had fallen off his bicycle and couldn't understand why the world had suddenly decided to hurt him. We stayed like that for a long time. Then I said, I'm going to call Patricia Holt first thing in the morning, and then we're going to take all of this to the police. Tyrese pulled back and looked at me. His eyes were red, but they were clear. And Simone? Simone, I said, is going to learn what your father already knew. What's that? I picked up the USB drive and held it in my hand. Small, black, the weight of almost nothing. That your grandfather's daughter doesn't quit. Patricia Holt was not what I expected. I don't know exactly what I had been imagining. Some version of the sharp-edged buckhead attorney. Someone in a power suit with a corner office full of intimidating furniture. What I found was a woman in her late 50s, natural silver hair, a modest office on the 4th floor of a building on Peachtree Road, with a waiting room that smelled like old books and a framed print of Harriet Tubman above the reception desk. She opened her office door herself when the receptionist buzzed her. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said simply, You're Glenn. I've been waiting. I know, I said. I'm sorry it took so long. Don't apologize, she said. Darnell told me it would happen when it was time. He was right about most things. She smiled, a small, measured smile with real grief behind it. Come in. We have a lot to go over. We sat in her office for 2 hours. She had everything. Duplicates of every file on the USB in a fireproof cabinet she'd owned for decades. She had her own notes from every meeting with Darnell. 6 sessions between October 2021 and February 2022. She had a handwriting expert's signed affidavit confirming the insurance amendment signature was a forgery. She had Darnell's own sworn written statement, notarized on February 28, 2022, describing everything he had discovered and laying out his concerns about his personal safety. 8 days later, he was dead. I almost went to the police after the accident, Patricia said. But I had a problem. Without Glenn Washington coming forward, without the rightful beneficiary of that policy actively participating, the insurance fraud case was thin enough that a good defense attorney could muddy it. And a murder investigation without physical evidence, based largely on the testimony of a dead man's lawyer and some financial documents, was going to be very hard to sustain. You needed me to come, I said. They said. I needed you to come ready. Darnell knew that too. He said you'd arrive with your own evidence. He said... She paused, and for the first time something like emotion moved across her face. He said, By the time Glenn finds her way to you, she'll have built half the case herself. That's just who she is. I pressed my lips together and looked at the Harriet Tubman print on the wall until the feeling passed. Then I opened my bag and put Raymond Okafor's folder on her desk, and the insurance papers from the blue envelope, and the financial records from the filing cabinet, and the photographs Raymond had taken of Simone and Deshawn at the Midtown coffee shop. Patricia looked through them methodically, 1 page at a time. When she finished, she looked up at me. That, she said, is enough. She called Detective Pauline Webb that same afternoon. Webb came to Patricia's office the next morning. She was exactly as I would later know her in the interrogation room, contained, observant, clicking her pen. She listened to everything without interrupting. She read every document. She listened to the 18-minute recording twice. When she was done, she asked 3 questions. Where is Deshawn Williams right now? Alpharetta, I said. The house he bought with the insurance money. And Simone Washington? She went back to nursing, I said. T said. Part-time, at Grady Memorial, started 2 months ago. Webb wrote something down. And Tyrese Washington, your son. We're clear that he was not involved in the planning of any of this? I looked at her directly. My son found evidence that his father had been murdered by his wife and sat on it for 2 years because he was trying to protect his child and didn't know who to trust. That is a man who was overwhelmed and afraid, not a man who was involved. I will stake my life on that." Webb held my gaze for a moment. Then she wrote something down. "All right, give me 48 hours. I was not there when it happened. I know this disappoints a certain expectation in a story like this. The dramatic confrontation, the villain undone face to face, the satisfaction of watching someone who hurt you understand that it is over. I understand that expectation. I had it myself for a moment. But Detective Webb had been very clear. Stay home, stay with your grandson, let us work. And Tyrese had seconded her with the authority of a family law attorney who had watched enough emotionally satisfying confrontations turn into procedural nightmares. So I stayed home. I picked Jalen up from school at 3 o'clock that Thursday afternoon. He came out of the building with his backpack straps on both shoulders and his shoelaces untied the way they always were, and a drawing he had made in art class that he wanted to show me immediately. "It's the farm we talked about," he said, climbing into the back seat. "The one Grandpa Darnell grew up on. Ms. Allen said I had to research it, so I found pictures online and drew it." I looked at the drawing. A farmhouse with a red roof and a horse in a fence and smoke coming out of the chimney in perfect childlike spirals. "This is beautiful, baby," I said, and meant it completely. "Can we make mac and cheese from scratch?" he asked. "Not the box kind." "We can," I said. "We'll start when we get home." We made mac and cheese from scratch. Real bechamel, sharp cheddar, a little smoked paprika the way Darnell used to make it. Jalen stood on a step stool at the stove and stirred the sauce with enormous concentration, his tongue slightly out the way it was when he was focused. We listened to an old Stevie Wonder record because Jalen had recently decided Stevie Wonder was his favorite, and I saw no reason to argue with excellent taste. At 4:47, my phone buzzed. "Tyrese, it's done. Both of them. Webb just called me." I put the phone back in my pocket. "More paprika?" Jalen asked. "Little bit more," I said. Simone had been arrested in the main hallway of Grady Memorial Hospital at 4:32 p.m. She had just finished a shift. She was in her scrubs, walking toward the elevator with her bag on her shoulder, the way she had walked out of that building hundreds of times before. 2 detectives met her at the elevator doors. She did not scream. She did not run. She did not, according to Webb's account, show very much of anything. She looked at the detectives and she said, "I'll need to call my attorney," and she held her wrists out for the cuffs. Webb told me this later, in a way that I think she meant as a kind of dark respect, the composure of it. But I did not find it surprising. Simone had been composed for 8 years. She had composed her way through a murder and a cover-up and 8 years of Tuesday dinners. Composure was her instrument. She had played it so long she no longer knew the difference between the performance and the person. Deshawn was arrested at his Alpharetta home at 4:45. He was eating dinner. According to the arresting officer, he dropped his fork and said, "Who told?" Which was, Webb observed to me later, not quite a denial. That evening, after Jalen was in bed and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Tyrese sat with me on the veranda. The air was cold. We had our coats on, our coffees, his first, mine third. The kind of cold that makes you aware of being warm inside it. "How are you?" I asked. He considered this seriously, which was the Tyrese way. He never gave reflexive answers to real questions. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "I feel like I've been in a car moving very fast for a very long time and someone just hit the brakes. Everything is still moving inside me, but nothing is actually moving." He paused. "Does that make sense?" "It makes complete sense. I loved her, Mama." He said it to the dark yard, not to me, which made it easier to hear. "I know what she did. I know what she is. But I loved who I thought she was, and those two things are both true at the same time, and I don't know where to put either of them." "You don't have to put them anywhere yet," I said. "You can hold 2 things at once for as long as you need to." "How long did you hold it?" "When you thought Dad had—" "About 2 weeks," I said honestly. 2 weeks of believing your father had been unfaithful, and I will tell you, even in that version of the story, even when I thought the worst of him, I missed him every single day. That's the part grief doesn't tell you in advance. You miss people in all their complexity, You miss them even when you're angry at them, even when they've hurt you. Tyrese nodded slowly. He was trying to protect us, he said. He was. He spent his last month scared and alone, and he didn't come to either of us. He came to Keisha, I said. He needed one person to know, and he left us everything we needed to finish it. I looked at my son's profile in the porch light. He wasn't alone, Tyrese. He knew we existed. He knew we'd find our way to the truth. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. We sat for a while. The neighborhood was quiet. Down the block, a dog barked once and went silent. Somewhere further away, a car passed with its radio on, a low thump of bass that faded into the night. What happens to Jalen? Tyrese said. Jalen has you, I said, and he has me, and he has a grandmother who will walk through fire before she lets him feel like he is anything other than completely loved. She's going to try to get visitation eventually. Her lawyer will let her lawyer try, I said. You have a very good attorney yourself, I hear. Tyrese looked at me. Then, for the first time in what felt like months, he laughed. A real laugh, startled out of him, brief but genuine. Yeah, he said. I guess I do. I went to bed that night and did not sleep immediately, which was not surprising. I lay in the dark of the house Darnell and I had shared for 35 years, and I had what I can only describe as a long, quiet conversation with him. Not prayer exactly, not grief exactly. Something in between, the particular communion of a woman who has known a man so deeply that she can still hear the timbre of his thinking even when he is gone. I told him what had happened. I told him it was done. I told him about Jalen on the step stool stirring the bechamel, about Patricia Holt's Harriet Tubman print, about Detective Webb and her clicking pen, about Tyrese laughing on the veranda. I told him I had found the letter. I told him I had never doubted him. That last part wasn't fully true, and I think he knew it, wherever he is. I had doubted. I had sat on that bedroom floor with a Polaroid photograph and doubted him with everything I had. But the doubt had lasted exactly as long as the evidence for it lasted, and when the evidence changed, so did I. That, I decided, was not a failure of faith. That was exactly what faith is supposed to look like. Not blind, not deaf, not insisting on a truth in the face of everything, but willing, always willing, to follow the evidence back to the person you know. I slept. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a January morning watching snow fall on Atlanta. Real snow. The kind that only comes twice a decade and sends the entire city into a reverent, delighted paralysis. The zinnias were long dead, invisible under 2 inches of white. The street was silent. The world had gone quiet and clean. Simone had accepted a plea agreement in December. 2nd-degree murder. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Insurance fraud. 22 years, no possibility of parole for 16. Her attorney had argued for a lesser charge. Detective Webb's team had argued back with Darnell's USB drive and Patricia Holt's notarized affidavit and 18 minutes of Simone's own voice on tape. The USB drive won. Deshawn pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. 14 years. He had cried in the courtroom. Real tears, I was told by Tyrese, who had been there. I tried to feel something about that, and found that I couldn't yet. Maybe later. The $750,000 had been recovered and ordered returned to Darnell's estate, which meant legally to me. I had put $500,000 in a trust for Jalen's education, earmarked for college and whatever came after. The rest I split between the church's community program and a small foundation Patricia Holt had told me about that provided legal aid to elderly women navigating family financial fraud. It felt like the right shape for that money. I heard small feet on the stairs. Then Jalen appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up, eyes barely open. He looked at the snow outside the kitchen window and his face transformed entirely. 11 years old, suddenly 6. Grandma Glenn, snow. I see it. Can we go outside? After breakfast. He climbed onto the stool at the kitchen counter and accepted the cup of hot chocolate I had made preemptively because I know my grandson. He cupped it in both hands and looked out the window at the white yard with an expression of pure, uncomplicated delight. I stood at the stove and watched him. This boy who had Darnell's forehead and Tyrese's serious eyes, and who did not yet know the full shape of what his family had been through, or the full weight of what had been done and undone on his behalf. He would know, eventually. Tyrese and I had talked about it, the therapist they were already seeing, the age-appropriate conversations that would come in stages, the long, patient work of helping a child understand a complicated truth without letting that truth define him. Not today, though. Today was snow. Tyrese came downstairs 20 minutes later, hair still wet from the shower, and stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw the two of us, me at the stove, Jalen at the counter, both of us watching the white world outside. He looked at us for a moment the way you look at something you were afraid of losing. Then he said, "Is there more hot chocolate?" "There's always more hot chocolate," I said. He said. That afternoon, after the snow had softened to slush, and Jalen had been thoroughly soaked from building something that was more ambition than Snowman, after Tyrese had made us all grilled cheese and tomato soup, and we had eaten it at the kitchen table listening to the Stevie Wonder record again. After all of that, I sat alone on the veranda in the last gray light of the winter afternoon, with my coffee and my thoughts. I thought about Darnell. I thought about the 43 years of a life built together. The mortgage and the Sundays and the 2-cup mornings and the arguments about the double cheeseburger and the 63 birthdays, 21 of which I had celebrated without him, one of which I had spent in a police interrogation room with dried blood on my sleeve. I thought about what I had learned. Not about Simone, not about Deshawn. What I had learned about myself. I had learned that I was harder than I knew, that the particular hardness that comes from decades of teaching other people's children, of learning to absorb chaos and stay level, of meeting fear with patience, of refusing to panic in front of someone who is watching you for evidence that panic is the appropriate response, that hardness does not leave you when the classroom does. It moves with you. It waits. I had learned that age is not subtraction. Every year I had lived was still in me. Every hard thing I had survived. My mother's death, the years of financial strain, Darnell's first health scare, the long loneliness of early widowhood. None of it had taken anything from me. All of it had left something behind. A kind of sediment. A deepening of the riverbed. They had called me an old woman like it was a verdict. It was a credential. I had learned, finally, something about love, about how love does not always look like we expect it to look. Darnell had loved me by going quiet when I needed him to speak. That was a failure. I will not pretend otherwise. But he had also loved me by doing the hardest, most frightening work of his life in silence, building me a case I could use after he was gone, leaving me the tools and trusting me to find them. That kind of love is imperfect, and it is real, and it is the kind that most of us, if we are honest, actually receive from each other. Partial, flawed, sometimes misdirected, but there, unmistakably there. I thought about the brown leather wallet, about how I had almost thrown away the velvet pouch that held the key, about Barbara Nguyen opening her door to a stranger at 7 a.m. because something in a woman's face told her this mattered, about Raymond Okafor, who started pulling a thread and couldn't stop, about Patricia Holt in her 4th-floor office, waiting for a client's wife to finally arrive, about Keisha, who had carried a secret for 2 years in obedience to a promise, and the weight of it had bent her, but not broken her, about how many ordinary people, doing small, ordinary things, had kept the truth alive long enough for me to find it. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A text from Detective Webb. "Thought you'd want to know. Sentencing confirmed today. No reductions granted. It's final, Ms. Washington. Get some rest." Then, a moment later, "Your husband was a smart man. Turned out, he married smarter." I looked at that last line for a moment. Then I set the phone face down and looked out at the yard where the snow was still white along the edges of the fence, and the zinnias were under there somewhere, sleeping, waiting for spring the way they always did. I picked up my coffee. I finished it. Inside, I could hear Jalen asking Tyrese to play the Stevie Wonder record again, and Tyrese saying you literally just heard it, and Jalen saying so and Tyrese laughing. The porch light was on. The house was warm. I sat in the January cold for one more minute, long enough to say the thing I needed to say to the yard and the bare zinnias and the winter sky and whoever, if anyone, was listening. I found everything you left me. I finished what you started. Rest now, Darnell. We're all right. I got up. I went inside. I put the coffee cup in the sink and turned off the kitchen light and walked toward the sound of my son and my grandson and the voice of Stevie Wonder filling the warm house on a cold January night. 63 years old. Retired schoolteacher. Grandmother. Widow. I had been called an old woman like it was a reason to stop. They forgot something. Old women have been surviving since the beginning of time, and we have never once needed anyone's permission to begin.